Joining us right now, Chris Horner of the Competitive Enterprise Institute. He's not just with the Competitive Enterprise Institute. He's a senior fellow, ladies and gentlemen.
That's impressive.
Yeah, you don't want to be a junior fellow.
No, you want to be a senior fellow always. That's in fact, in our relationship, I would be the senior fellow.
You certainly are. His book, Red Hot Lies, How Global Warming Alarmists Use Threats, Fraud, and Deception to Keep You Misinformed. And, of course, my favorite, The Politically Incorrect Guide to Global Warming and Environmentalism. Chris Horner, thanks for joining us. The EPA is really in the news these days. Let's start with this story about coal. I saw this in the Washington Examiner from Ash Show. She wrote this up here on how the fact that the Environmental Protection Agency, when asked by the Office of Management and Budget to sort of make all of the goals for coal plants and their costs and their emissions to be more realistic, to actually fit into the world that we live in, not this pipe dream that they have about coal emissions, they've just ignored it. The EPA has just sort of gone rogue on their own. Talk to me about this. Explain it to me.
That's accurate, and there's more to the story, and that is that they are receiving counsel, as the law requires, from the Office of Management and Budget, but they have a very close, in fact, incestuous relationship with groups from whom EPA drew many of its senior officials. These green pressure groups with whom EPA, they're still working very closely. I have emails showing that several EPA and other agencies, including a White House employee, are still using the Green Pressure Group's email servers for certain correspondence. That is, these are government records that cannot be under the sole control of a Green Pressure Group and should not be under their control at all.
So they used to work for these radical environmental groups. Then they, of course, went right to the EPA when Obama became president, and they're still using, shared resources and their email servers from the environmental wacko groups?
Yes, they are.
Unbelievable.
All the way up to the science czar, John Holdren, who's still using one of those email accounts. We haven't revealed any of that yet until just a moment ago, but there's more on that to come. This came from the Richard Windsor case in an index of documents and some other things. We found an awful lot. They're using AOL accounts and so on. But these groups from which they drew, for example, 6 of their 10 regional administrators, drew a lot of headquarters staff, then are tasked with being the agency's guy or gal in that group or liaison to that group, just not the group they used to work for conflicts reasons. So you see it's perfectly fine. But what we've obtained are a lot of emails showing that you cannot slip a cigarette paper between the two, at least in their minds. There's no distinction between Sierra Club and EPA except the minor constitutional impediment that one of them can actually promulgate rules.
Well, it sounds like you've really stumbled into something with this email trail. We look forward to more reporting on that.
Let's not forget, though, Chris Horner's the guy who discovered that the head of EPA was using a fake name fake emails and all that.
There you go. Well, I got to ask you about this other story because I don't understand that. I honestly just can't wrap my head around it, so maybe you can help me understand it. We did this story the other day about the EPA, and apparently some ruling that came from the EPA basically shrunk the size of Wyoming by about 1 million acres and gave it to an Indian group. Now, as I understand it, I thought that was under like the Bureau of Land Management or the Department of Energy, but apparently the EPA also has the ability to do this. How did this happen?
EPA has a very robust practice in working with Indian tribes and essentially granting them state status for certain purposes under the Clean Air Act. And that's what happened here. And as part of this, they decided, amid the fashionable norm of ignoring law or declaring law, asserting law, they shrunk the size of Wyoming and moved some towns into tribal areas related to money and monitoring for pollutants under the Clean Air Act.
And it has wider implications than just the Clean Air Act, right?
Yes.
Hell yeah.
When you move a town into an Indian reservation and claim they're now within another state, the Indian reservation, it have numerous ripple impacts.
But let's go back to this theme of the day, which is, the borders of this state, Wyoming, and the Indian reservation that exists within it. This was set by Congress in 1905 and authorized by the president, the way we make laws here in the United States of America. Now a administration agency, the EPA, just goes in and redraws the boundaries of a state because they choose to?
That's adorable. The way we make laws here. Look, you need to read more newspapers. We used to make laws that way. What we've learned is that the unelected bureaucracy will wait for the elected representatives until they feel they've waited long enough. And EPA is probably so far in my universe, they are clearly the most aggressive transgressor on this. They will declare that the number 250 means 250,000 when they need 250 to mean 250,000. They will say that anything is a pollutant so that they can get their meat hooks around it. They'll say that anything is a wetland. They'll say that anything is a stream. They'll say that anything is an Indian reservation if it suits their purposes.
Chris Horner from the Competitive Enterprise Institute. Last time we had you on, we were terribly concerned about all of the global warming scientists who got stuck in the ice down in Antarctica. Remember, they were there to measure how thin the ice was in Antarctica and how we were, near a catastrophe because
then they got frozen.
Right. Now, what's the latest on this? It's 23 days later.
Right, and apparently they have received permission to leave the ship. I can imagine no crew has ever been gladder than if Skipper and Gilligan did, in fact, get rid of Lovett and Thurston Howell. But they've gotten rid of them, and now the bill comes in, and it looks like the university that subcontracted the ship is stuck with a $2.4 million, I don't know if that's Australian or U.S. bill, for the rescue operation. But meanwhile, they have at least, to me, this will be worth it because they have set their movement back dramatically.
Yeah, they really have. The optics of this was terrible. It's so funny how many media reports refused to report on the fact that they were there to measure how the ice pack was melting in Antarctica and then got stuck in the ice.
But there's a theme here. I mean, we're seeing it, and it's even in today's news in other ways. The president doesn't like a law. He doesn't enforce the law. The EPA doesn't agree with the law. They find some unique way to twist the facts so that they can change the law. And in the Commonwealth of Virginia, you've got a constitutional amendment. The Attorney General doesn't like it, and he decides, well, I'm just not going to defend it. I mean, whatever happened to the rule of law?
But Chris Horner, this story is even a little bit more egregious because these people in the EPA, these are unelected, faceless, nameless bureaucrats who rewrite the law. At least we know the names of the other people who are doing it.
That's true. Now, this leads into something that's also quite fashionable right now, which is saying those totalitarian regimes that don't have representative democracy, that's the way to go. Even, of course, they're filthy and poor because wealthier is healthier, wealthier is cleaner. But they don't have problems like Brian saying, hey, wait a minute, this isn't the way we do things. Maybe we should revisit this. Maybe we should sue and block this. Yeah. And now the chorus is coming out saying, yes, I hear you, and I don't want to hear you, so this really is not the optimal way to go. When people say this, that having the little people, other people have a say in matters, you ought to perk up your ears and try to get more involved, not less. So I'm glad we're covering this.
Thank you, Chris Horner. Always good to have you on these things.
Really appreciate it.